We're going to talk about Bitcoin, blockchain, and how bad it is, really. So please welcome Colette.
All right, so I just want to be clear. I'm actually not talking about blockchain. So if anybody else is presenting on a blockchain tonight, great. Looking forward to your talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about Bitcoin. So I've seen a lot of news headlines that look like this recently, and I found myself wondering, is this true? How bad is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is one of many cryptocurrencies, but we'll focus on it tonight because it's the oldest, it's the most widely exchanged, and you probably recognize the name. Bitcoin is a type of virtual money that uses blockchain technology for transactions. So if I send a Bitcoin to you, sir, you all write that down. And then you write down that transaction each time the Bitcoin changes hands. That's blockchain. The companies looking for Bitcoin are called miners. And despite the name, the bulk of miners' activity goes toward tracking transactions on the Bitcoin network like you just did. As you can see, this requires a lot of hardware and a lot of energy. So miners' hardware basically runs code and looks for a hash key. It's like searching for a needle in the haystack, and the needle is the Bitcoin. The faster you run the code, the more likely you are to find that Bitcoin, which as of tonight is worth about $9,000. The question is it worth the energy cost? So quick show of hands, how many of you have seen headlines like this as of late? Right. Well, call me Alice, because I went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole to find out if the hype is right or if it's just fake news. Now, estimations put Bitcoin electricity use at about 18 terawatt hours per year. That's based on the number of miners and the efficiency of the mining hardware. And fun fact, efficiency is given in joules per gigahash, which sounds like a ton of pot, but it's just a measure of code. If all miners used the least efficient hardware, they'd consume about 27 terawatt hours in a year. If they use the most efficient, they'd consume 14 terawatt hours. Likely real consumption is somewhere in between with a slight skew toward efficiency. That's the 18 terawatt hours. And I figured your attention might be waning, so here's a cat. You need to remember one thing. Efficiency has increased in mining hardware between 70 and 90% in the last 3 years, which is remarkable. But let's contextualize mining with a single operator. So with 3 facilities in the US, this miner produces about 2,200 Bitcoins using 17,000 megawatt hours of power, costing $1.2 million a year, which is actually pretty cheap. But the question is this a lot or is this not a lot of energy? If I show you this headline, then yes, Bitcoin uses a ton of electricity. But megawatts and terawatts are abstract, and so we compare. And what we compare influences the way we see the numbers. Guess what else uses more electricity than entire countries? I'm just going to let that sink in for a moment. All right. But let's get back to our best estimate, which is the 18 terawatt hours in context. Globally, we use 22,000 terawatt hours of electricity in a year. About 25% of that comes from solar. So that means our 18 terawatt hours from Bitcoin represents 0.1% of global electricity use, which isn't much at a global scale, but can be a ton at a local level. So if you're a utility with excess power, great news. But utilities that are serving large concentrations of miners like Chelan County and Washington State are finding a need to hike their rates to increase supply to meet rising demand. And demand is rising, but efficiency is also rapidly rising. Remember the only thing I asked you to remember from the cat slide. And the incentive to mine will decrease over time as things become harder and because there's a fixed number of Bitcoin. So that's how much energy. Now, where to mine? If we're Bitcoin miners, we want to find abundant and cheap energy in places with cool temperatures so we don't spend money cooling our hardware. We want a business-friendly environment, and we want high internet speeds. This table rates countries with a red or green light for mining based on a number of factors, like ease of doing business and the power price. So regardless of renewables, we're going to Canada, Iceland, or Switzerland. But the good news is that those places also have a lot of renewables. This is a geothermal plant in Iceland, which is home to many cryptocurrency miners. Operations are moving to Iceland because it's low cost and low risk energy. And so the exciting thing is that absent regulation, miners are incented to find renewables, which proves the value and drives demand. Credit's cryptocurrency, which was launched here in Denver, is connecting cryptocurrency miners to renewables and is dedicated to supporting renewable energy projects. All right, so what have we learned in the last 4.5 minutes? We have learned that in a global context, Bitcoin doesn't actually use that much energy. but in a local context, it can use a lot. We've learned that in the short run, mining will use more energy, but in the long run, it probably won't. And cryptocurrency markets are seeking renewables, which is good news. So how bad is Bitcoin? My conclusion is that it's not that bad. And contrary to alarmist headlines, it might actually be good news for renewables. Thank you.